Hello and welcome everybody to Monday with Mandy. My name is Mandy Tice. I'm the director of the School of Atelier Arts. I teach people how to draw and paint realistically. For the last few weeks, we've been really picking away at this floral painting, and I was tempted to let it go and just get on to something different this week. But the truth is that you need to finish your paintings, right? So let me know in the chat who here is guilty of starting 100 paintings and maybe not finishing them. I mean, I should be raising my hand the hardest because I am so guilty of this. Different painters work differently, have different ideas, have different moments in the process that they're more motivated than others. And I find it very difficult to finish a painting. I love starting paintings. I love when I have that like fresh idea and that fresh thought. And I even like the middle of paintings, but doing the finishing tiny detail work that we're going to be doing today, I find that I struggle to finish that. So I thought it'd be important to finish it with all of you for my benefit, for your benefit. We'll all be better because we powered through and made big girl choices today. Please let me know where you're coming in from in the chat. I love seeing everybody pop in and say hello. And I was just away for the Plein Air Convention and Expo in Reno, Utah, and Lake Tahoe. I think I said Reno, Tahoe. Reno, Nevada. Nevada's a state, and Tahoe is a lake. And it was wonderful. If you happen to meet me there or you're attending the conference, I'd love to hear that from you as well. Really, I mean, the landscape conference was amazing. I am not the same person that I was when I left. So shout out to Eric Rhodes, who runs that conference, and Streamline Publishing. They do a wonderful job. And Rita, welcome from Germany. So happy to have you here today. Welcome, welcome. All right. So we were not here last week because I was at the PACE conference, but I'm back. Yay. And we're going to continue working on this painting here. Now, it's a little less obvious what to do next because we have a mostly resolved painting, but we don't want one part of the painting to look like it's further along than another part of the painting. So right now we have a lot more refinement up here than we do, say, on these edges. They're a little rough. We don't have the subtlety of color down here that we have up here. And I mean, this really feels, if you just cropped off the bottom of the painting here, this is basically an abstract painting, right? So we could do a lot more to show the atmosphere, to show how the light is hitting and transitioning across this plane. Remember that this part of the plane that's closest to our light source is going to be brightest, and it's going to get darker as it goes back in space because this part of the ground plane is further away from our light source than the front. But also it's going to get darker as it goes this way because this part of our ground plane is closer to the light source than this. And what that does is it creates basically a gradient going in two directions. The gradient's getting darker going back in space, and the gradient's getting darker from left to right. So we're essentially getting a gradient that's going to be a diagonal here. Now, we started that on the top plane in our last class, and it's looking much better. But what's not happening is that we aren't following the same ideas on this skinny little front plane here. This side would be lighter than this side. Right now, it's just the tiniest bit lighter. It is getting a little bit darker over here, but these edges are really sloppy, messy. There's no gradient down here. This is another front plane down here. So we just have some work to do today. This is kind of some people get really excited about this work. Like a really subtle transition on a plane is some people's total jam, right? Like they live for that, right? And for other people, it might be, finding these deep chromas and these yellows. And for other people, it might be, shape finding in these leaves, like this kind of gestural edge here. So we're not all the same. And as you learn to draw and paint, you're going to find that different things call to you at different times in your painting career as well, right? So, you're never, what's the word I'm looking for? You're never the same as a painter. You're never the same painter twice when you get in front of your easel, right? Your subject's going to manipulate you. The light's going to manipulate you. Your feelings of whatever's going on in your life that day are going to manipulate you. And so you're always painting your truth, but your truth is different from day to day. But at the end of a painting, we need it to be really unified here. I have a lot of new ideas in my head from that conference that I went to. I'm mostly a studio painter, right? So most of the times when we have Monday with Mandy, you're sitting here, I'm sitting here, we're in a nice studio space. It doesn't matter if it's raining or sunshine, like we can work. But in plein air, when you paint outside, obviously there are a lot more variables. And watching some of the best plein air painters in the world work last week, it was really incredible how much they depend on visual memory because when you're outside, things can change quickly. How do you capture a cloud, right? It's not going to sit still for you like my flowers. My flowers, of course, are looking quite unhealthy these days, right? So we did the flowers first, and then we're going to be just finishing up this kind of ground plane. Maybe touch up the base. The base feels a little sloppy compared to the flowers, so we're going to pick at that a little bit too. I forget what I was saying, other than my mind was blown working with the best landscape painters in the world. I learned so much. And if you ever get a chance to go to that conference, I strongly recommend. It was fabulous. Okay, so I'm just going to hop into it because I want to actually finish this painting today. I know I said that a couple Mondays ago, but I mean it today. I want to finish this painting. So we're just going to be cleaning up these edges and kind of refining this. We could touch up our ellipse a little bit, really brighten some of the brights, even darken some of the darks here. And I think we'll be good. All right, so I'm just going to grab my paintbrush here. Okay, you want to work with a brush that's proportionate to the space. I don't want a tiny brush because I'm covering a lot of space, but this bar here, this front plane is actually rather skinny. So I want to not have a brush that's so big that I can't get through on this skinny plane here. I also need to mix up this color. This is our kind of neutral leaning towards green color. So I like to start by mixing what I call a chromatic neutral, and it's a little bit of red, yellow, and blue all mixed together until it looks like a gray that isn't a green gray or a blue gray. It's just kind of a gray gray. Oops. It's called a chromatic neutral because you're taking your red, your yellow, and your blue, which are all chromatic colors. All right, right now this is very green. So if I want it to be neutralized, I need to add the opposite of green, which is red. Like I do want it to lean slightly green as a neutral, just not as green as I had it there. And then sometimes it's really useful to add a little bit of white when you're mixing a neutral. It helps you see the real color. The darker a color is, the more difficult it is to tell exactly what color it is. The same is true if you go too light. It's really difficult to tell the true color if something's too light. Okay, so I have a light neutral and a dark neutral, and this will be a good base to pull from for the finishing that we're going to be doing today. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to start by trying to match a note that I have down there. That's a little bit on the dark side. I need to go a little lighter. Oh, that's almost a perfect match. You guys are also a little far away. I'm going to pull you a little closer, and we're working low. I don't want to lift my canvas higher because I want it to stay on the same plane as what I'm looking at. So I'm going to tilt the camera down a little bit for you all. All right, so remember this side is our lighter side, and it's going to get darker as it transitions. And I feel like this greenish neutral is a little warm. I'm going to cool it down with a touch of blue. And we need to go a touch lighter. So I'm mixing in just a little bit of blue into the lightest part of my pile here. And good morning from Pennsylvania, Renee. Good to see you here. Welcome, welcome. All right, it looks like I need a little bit more white, especially for this side. Okay, that's feeling better. Now, I don't want a really sharp edge all the way across here. Edges are not consistent from left to right. What is true is we have a little bit of a highlight on here, and I'm leaving those rough because they match kind of the aesthetic that I have up here in the flowers. But I don't want it to look like a straight line going across. That's not the goal. these planes aren't perfectly flat. They're not perfectly sharp when they turn the corner. And we want to, show the real beauty and the nuance in something that seems really straightforward and obvious, but it actually has its own beauty, its own rhythm. Um, we want to make sure that we're not treating any part of the painting with a completely different hand than the rest of the painting, right? So we want to think about unity. How can we finish this and still make it feel, like it belongs with the rest of the painting? So I'm cleaning up this edge a little bit. I don't want it to feel sloppy, but I do like some of the softness in here. You want to be careful too. Whenever you work on an edge, it's easy for it to start wobbling, warbling, getting all, wonky. So, be mindful. I like to have both colors on my palette. So I'm going to mix this light color. That's on top. It's kind of a light purplish color, slightly neutralized purple. But, I'm just going to put a little bit of that color down. That's need to go lighter. To straighten out that edge, and I'm gonna have to push and pull a few times from my dark to my light. But you have to think about, is my edge straight? So you can harden it, you can soften it, but it still has to read as going across here evenly. And we don't want it to warp. So it has to feel strong, but not overly defined. It'll take you some time to figure out how you want to meet your ground plane to your side plane to your front plane. Oh, okay. So Renee is actually Ellen. Excellent. So Ellen, good to have you here. Pace was incredible. I talked about it a little bit when I first got here, but it's really amazing to be able to work with some of the best landscape painters in the entire world. And I feel like I have a handle on my indoor painting, and silly me, I was like, I've painted outdoors a few times, but really when you're painting next to the best painters in the world and you're out there in the field, it's mind blowing. Like the way that they're, able to see and interpret nature compared to, my process is very studio based, right? So, I'm used to having my light controlled. I'm not worried about capturing clouds before they disappear, right? And you see these people, especially the plein air painters, they work so much from memory. It's incredible, their visual memory that they've had to develop, because they'll set their shadows and leave them, and even if what they're seeing changes over the course of the day, it's really incredible. When I've been plein air painting before, I would just go out for an hour, maybe 2 hours most at a time, and go back that same time of day. So I had the same shadows, like trying to make it a studio environment. But then when I was out there with Pace and with these people, the best of the best, they're just being like, well, I want to paint all day today, so I guess I'm just going to have to memorize where everything is right now and then paint from there, which was insane to me. So I really had an eye-opening experience, and really enjoyed Pace. If you ever get a chance to go, it's really a great experience. And Eric Rhodes is not paying me to say that. Like, it was incredible. I felt like I was seeing outside for the very first time. It's been a long time since I felt that way, in my training. But, that's the thing. People think, oh, you go and you get atelier training and then you know everything. That's not at all. That's not at all how it is. But the thing that atelier training will give you is the ability to keep learning. And, I'm so grateful for my atelier training to have brought me to the conference in the first place, and then help me really see what they were doing, and understanding what they were doing. Because it takes a certain level of sophistication to be able to, really pick up what someone's sharing with you. You guys may notice that too. Like maybe the first time you've seen me paint, you're like, what the heck is she talking about, right? But then maybe the third or fourth time you hear me use the same terms, it gets a little easier to understand. I would say that was similar to what my experience was. But I feel very inspired to be out and about landscape painting. I will be posting some of my landscape works from the conference, and I'm going to be going out a lot this week. Make sure to follow me on Instagram at Mandy Fine Artist if you want to see those updates. Yes, the light change is very hard. I'm seeing some comments in the chat. Yeah, It's funny because people who know me, they are like, "Oh, Mandy, she's chill, she's laid back," but not in the studio, not in the studio. So it's interesting that you know that different types of painting draw different people. Like, if you are a portrait painter, you're often drawn to these subtleties and neutrals on a skin tone, right? Like that's the appeal of portrait painting. And if you're a nature painter, it's because you like being out in nature, right? And I love nature, but I am like such a wimp. Like, I don't want to have bugs on me. I don't want to be too hot. I don't want to be too cold. So I've always just kind of gone out when it's perfect, but now after going to this conference, I realized that, you can go out and not for very long and get just a really strong visual like moment going in your head that you can work from for a very long time. You don't even have to still be outside. You can do a little study, take it back to your studio. And these people's visual memory is so good that they're creating these beautiful paintings in their studio from just a study that's enough to remind them of what they saw. That to me was the most eye-opening thing in the world about people who paint pure landscape, for their living. I'm primarily a studio painter, as I said. I love florals, but I love controlling my studio light. So it'll be a good lesson for me as I continue working on my landscape painting to develop my visual memory and maybe chill out a little bit. Maybe I don't have to be such a control freak. Oh, I didn't want to do that. And, I see artists too, they go through multiple personalities throughout their art career, right? They might start really tight and then go loose for a while and then, change again later on. I mean, there's just so much to learn. And whatever you feel inspired by, I really believe that that's what you should be focused on in your artwork. At least for me, anytime I feel really inspired, I have to take advantage of it, just really use it as much as I can to help me jump to the next level. That's not to say that I'm always inspired. You have to paint whether you're inspired or not. But the days that you feel extra inspired, like I do right now for landscape painting, take advantage, make the extra effort to really capitalize on it. If you ever see me do something in here that you're like, that calls to your art heart, like set something up right away, right then. Okay, so I'm trying to keep this straight. Now, some people will use a straight edge, but I find that I really like kind of the charm of a not quite straight edge. I like it to feel, just have a little bit of character to it. You can always have a straight edge and then soften it. Lots of people do that. That's totally valid. I don't know. I like the charm of doing it by hand, and also the practice of the skill. Because if you can draw a straight line, that takes some control and training that comes with practice and experience. All right, so I'm just trying to straighten this edge. I need to straighten it on the bottom down here too. That's a little silly down here. So there's a small shadow underneath here, which is what line was supposed to indicate, but it's not reading as a shadow, it's reading as a line. So I want to soften it, kind of really go back into it. Yes, I will definitely post the pictures from Pace on Instagram. I just got home. I'm unpacked. I went grocery shopping. I'm like sitting there, like just sitting on my couch for like an hour at a time, just my mind blown from how much I learned. Like that was a really wonderful experience. Okay, now I have a warm dark that I started throwing down here, but all my other darks are cool darks, and this is going to really stand out as a warm dark, and also I'm absorbing it cooler than the way I painted it. So I'm going to exaggerate the coolness because I want it to feel unified with the rest of my painting here. And because I'm repainting this bottom part too, I'm just getting the shape, and then when I paint the very last bottom part, I'll worry about the edge. When you're designing as well, be mindful that you have a frame coming in here. So I don't like that there's a little corner that's going to be really sharp down here, but also the frame is going to mitigate that quite a bit. So normally I wouldn't like that design, but because it's so close to the edge, I know my frame's going to cover that point and it won't stand out so much. Some of these things are just things experience teaches you over time. When you frame enough paintings, you anticipate when you're painting them. How many times have I made a perfect painting and not accounted for the edge I'm going to lose and then hated it when it was framed? Um, okay. Just going to thicken up the shadow before I start laying down that last bottom bit. Okay, and now of course I need to mix this bottom bit and soften this edge. I'm still thinking about these gradients. They're subtle, but this bottom bit is going to be lighter over here and it needs to get a little bit darker. Right now it feels kind of like a cartoon plane because it doesn't have that subtlety of the light transitioning to the shadow. All right, so I'm going to mix a new pile here. My yellow is being very runny today. Light neutrals are hard. So this is a yellow, that would be the hue, but it's a neutralized yellow and it's light in value. So anything that is really neutralized and light in value can be tricky to get. So it might take me well, that's actually not a bad match. I was about to say it's going to take me a few times to get it, but apparently I'm a liar to all of you today. So this is the light side. The nice thing about putting your second layer down is that you don't have to put it on crazy thick and you can let some of what's underneath shine through a little bit. And it gives it a little bit of texture, a little bit of depth. But I do want to make sure as I'm painting this that we get some of this transition going, this shade from light to dark. You'll see that I'm going across, but then I'm going to come back and kind of push it up and down. We don't want one stroke. We don't want this to look streaky through here. We want it to feel like a transition. some hard and soft edges. Just keep working our way across. And it does need to get a little darker as it goes across. That's part of why, oh, I hate that color. Let's neutralize that and lighten it a little bit. All right, so this is an art of subtlety. If you're dealing in planes, it's definitely an art of subtlety. And I'm trying to, when we're dealing with neutrals and we're trying to unify the painting at the end, I'm pulling in a couple of these neutral notes that are just a little bit cooler. I'm just trying to match this color into here to just kind of give it some unity to connect it a little bit. And I do want it to get darker as it's going across here. So I'm kind of working on my color first, and then I'll work on the edge, because when I have wet paint on both sides, it's a little easier. And that's too dark. Giving it some movement, giving it a little bit of texture. We don't want it to feel like it was painted by a completely different hand than the rest of the flower painting. So I'm trying to use similar strokes. And just not letting this stand out so much. This was stealing the show before, and we want it to really settle in. Okay, so it's always a little bit back and forth. Now, most of this has wet paint on it, so it's easier to push and pull. And it doesn't have to be such an obvious, we can have a slightly softer edge here. This is really harsh, but this edge actually softens as it goes down. Okay, so I softened it, but it's too soft, so now I'm going to go back and reinforce it a touch. And then we have to, of course, go back and straighten our edges. These edges don't have to be defined everywhere. Like, you can lose them, but they have to read as if they're going straight across. We don't want them to read wonky. So yeah, just I continued back and forth, little adjustment here and there. I want this to be just a little bit lighter here. That was probably too light. Do you see how when I put this light down, it broke the going light to dark, but this dark had snuck up too high. So I'm going to use this light to blend into that dark and make it feel like it's not sticking up so high. And then I can always come back in and darken it. Now we dip too low, so I'm going to push up from below slightly. Okay. That feels all right. Okay, so we have some soft edge. I'm going to just kind of work this in. You don't want all your brush strokes going the same way. It'll catch light. So it's really, they call this basket weaving, like putting the strokes down in different directions. Okay. That's feeling much better. This is actually too bright down here. So I'm going to, it's so bright because it's such a small, skinny space. So if we diminish it just a little bit, it won't be so obnoxious down here. We still want it to be lighter, but we don't want it to take the show. When you have a skinny shape, it can really steal from your main subject. So you want to be careful about that. Okay. Some final highlights on the vase and maybe, there's a little bit of color in here that's a little bit warmer, and I'm debating whether I want to put that in, but I think I'm going to. And the shadows that the flowers are casting, I'm just going to lightly scumble a little bit of warmth in here. It's a little on the dark side. Because the flowers that are casting these shadows are so far away, they're actually not so dark in here. But there is a little bit of a color movement before. Like, do you see how this is basically all a cool? There's a little bit of a play of warm and cool in here that I'd like to get a little bit of the warmth in. Just touches of it. This is such a subtle change. You might not be able to see it in the video. Sometimes you just have to have faith. Sometimes I call these fairy values or fairy colors when you're putting in just such a little amount that even as you're painting it, you can't barely see it yourself, but you just have to believe in it and know it's there. And you believe in it until you do see it, which sounds like a crazy thing. I sound like a crazy person, but it's true. And when I'm teaching in person, I'll often lay these values down for my students, or even when I'm teaching in my online class, I critique with my iPad and I'll turn the transparency down to like 1% and then just barely add a little bit of something. And then, we have it on and then I take it off and then show it again and take it off until my students can really see what a small difference it makes. I'm getting sassed about the dead flowers from Ellen. Yes, my flowers are super dead. Yes, we want some life in our dead flowers. Usually I paint these paintings more quickly, but because I had started this as a demo and then we were continuing it on Mondays, it's really been drawn out. Typically, I would start a painting and a flower painting, and it'd be 4 or 5 days in a row, that I would do it. So the flowers still die in that time, but not quite like to this sad wah wah level. Oh, I appreciate your faith in me there, Ellen. Sometimes I have it together. We'll see. Painting live for all the world to see is kind of a fun but different kind of challenge than painting outside or painting alone in your studio or talking and painting, I paint things a little differently sometimes because I feel like it'll give clarity when I'm teaching than I do when I'm just like alone in my studio. Um, okay, I feel like this vase is behind. I feel like this flower is reading so well and this vase is just a little muddled. And because this is dry, I can really sculpt into these highlights in a way that I can't when it's wet. Both ways. I can widen and shrink some of these. So I feel like this one could widen slightly, and it has a cool layer next to it. That already feels better to me. This one is just too even. So there's kind of a darkness that comes into this one. Um, so there's like it gets split up a little bit there. And that's what's kind of giving it that waviness. And then we can further clarify what's going on here. There's so just getting it up a little bit. Probably went a little too dark, so let's find this light value. The gesture needs to read the same. It needs to read honest even when it's um, a highlight, right? People don't realize that gestures have or highlights have gesture. All right, so getting into some other there's some areas that could be brightened slightly, like there's a nice moment down here. It's amazing how just getting a nice bright light in the right place will really clean up a vase. This got a little fat, so we'll skinny that up. I might need a smaller brush. This brush is probably a little big for what I'm trying to do. But also, I painted everything else with a bigger brush, so if I go too small, this is going to start feeling more finished than the rest of the painting. We don't want that either. That's feeling better already. All right, now there's a little bit of light that I've allowed to be a lost edge here, but it only works if we have this darkness at the bottom of the vase, which is currently lost. So we're gonna throw that in. Um, Yeah, sometimes it just takes a little bit. Like we haven't done this much to the vase and we don't want to outline it, but we do want to clean it up. Um, I got a little fat here. And I feel like just cleaning up this top edge would be really helpful too. Sometimes it can get confusing when students are at a finishing stage. Like, what do I do next? And if you're ever lost, I encourage my students to always work from big ideas to small ideas. So even if we're working in the base, I worked on the area that was feeling the most obnoxious first. And now that that's settled in, now this is becoming the most obnoxious area. It's reading cartoony. It's not really reading flat or cleanly the way that I'd like it to. And it's because these highlights got really wide. So I'm going to skinny up these highlights a touch. There's a little bit of an orange brightness in here. Just a little slightly lighter note. If you have it too harsh, like dark light, it's easy to get lost in that. It really is an art of subtlety. That's too warm. I need to cool it down with some green. So, I was getting the value that I wanted, but not the hue. I want to shift the hue green. There we go. Okay, this one highlight actually gets fatter. People don't realize, people want to put highlights kind of like what I did here as a line, but the spectral light actually will go outside the edge of the glass. You can create a pretty fat spectral highlight that goes well beyond the boundary of your object. And that's what's essentially happening here is that I want this highlight to extend. Do you see how I made it fat? It goes over the edge. And sometimes I like to layer my highlights like that first one wasn't so bright. And so now I'm gonna layer a little bit on top of it. I might need to wait for it to dry and put one more layer of bluey light on it. All right, and this highlight down here is really bright. It's more of a bluey color, so I'm gonna, and the same for this one down here. All right, I'm already feeling much better about this. This already is feeling like the colors are pulling from up here and down here, that it's not so sloppy, that we're being a little bit more observant on what's going on in this glass. Um, so yes, I'm saying that they, maybe had too much contrast, right? There's actually a lot of color in here. This highlight is blue. This highlight is yellow. This highlight is orange. There's the green of the stem showing through. There's a dark red green leaf that has a lot of red that's refracted out of it, creating kind of an orange streak here. People tend to just pick their white and go highlight, 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 all in white. But that's because they're choosing value, and highlights are very, very light in value. So that's a valid choice. You can choose value, but I almost always prefer to sacrifice the value a little bit and get the colors. So for example, this yellow highlight, it's yellow, which is darker than white. So I'm sacrificing a little bit of value in order to get the color yellow in there that to me feels brighter than the value of my whitest white. Okay, so I'm going to, I feel like this bottom needs some help as well. So let's see. There's kind of a sub highlight extending out that's like a little yellowy here. And it's doing the same thing almost on the side, extending out this way. It's creating the edge of the glass. But now I'm going to come back in with my dark because it got a little fat. And I'm still tempted to go to a smaller brush, but I've painted this whole painting with nothing smaller than this. And I really worry that if I transition to a smaller brush, oops, that's not the color I wanted, that I will ruin the effect, that it'll look tighter than the rest of the painting. And, try not to assume what your highlights are doing. This one highlight, I assume it would wrap around, but it actually has a little bit more of a straighter situation going on. That was a little bit of an aggressive color, a little too dark. I'm going to soften it. And then I went a little too dark. This brightness extends a little bit more in here. All right, we're starting to get it. I feel like there's a lost edge. This will either make or break this. Let's see what happens when I do that. I think I liked it better before. I think it's better to lose that edge than to over define it. Okay, and then there's a little itty bitty highlight back here that's, highlights aren't always bright either. This is like a value 4 or 5 highlight, just barely over here. And then I want to define, feel like this highlight can get defined a little bit more, just carved in. All right, I feel so much better about that. Of course, now when I tighten this, I'm a little dissatisfied with a little bit of the cast shadow around. I'm going to darken just slightly some of this because it's too much of a harsh change. So I'm just connecting the shadow to the edge of the glass slightly. Wow, that feels better. And I'm going to just attach these two dark bits. I don't want it to feel so polka dotty. It's not too light, not too dark. I'm trying to find that like middle Goldilocks vibe for these flowers. This mark here might confuse people. This is actually being enhanced. This is a glass vase, so when the light's hitting through it, it's creating a small highlight on the table. This is what makes glass feel like glass, and it's something that people often miss out on. Is glass reflects so much light that often, if you just paint the vase, you're not going to get the glass feel. But if you paint these like bright marks around it that the glass is emphasizing, that you'll see it. Okay. All right. Sometimes I just want to quit while I'm ahead. I'm feeling pretty good. I want to soften this slightly. We got just a touch dark. And I feel like this, lightening it just a little bit will help it feel more translucent, like glass. That was too light. I'm regretting that choice. I want it to go back. There we go. Maybe on this side. Just losing that edge. I feel like I don't need to define everything so much, especially with glass, because remember, glass is showing you what's behind it. So you can really lose some edges on glass. And I'm just going to bring in some of that green color. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to call it for now. You can take a vase way more refined than this. I just don't want to take my vase more refined from flowers. Now, if I wanted to take my flowers to one more level of refinement, what I need to do, of course, is to get some more flowers, put them as best I could in the location, and then do a finishing pass like that. But I find that I really like the life and gesture into flowers, and the more passes that I do on flowers, the more dead and stiff they become. So the way that I choose to paint flowers is I will paint them as far as I can get with the flower still being alive. But once that specific flower is dead, I don't replace them. So that's the level of refinement you'll get in the flowers. And I feel like that gives them the freshness, the brightness, the gesture, without like deadening them, overworking them. So that's my choice. Okay. Well, that's it, folks. Ta-da. We did it. I'm gonna leave this painting at this stage of development. I'm quite happy. It feels unified. I get the gesture, I get the chroma. I feel like my glass is reading as glass now. And I'm gonna call this painting. So thank you for joining us today. Next week, we're going to get back to that Velasquez master copy, and we're going to talk about how to paint out nose, eyes, slips. We're going to really get into each of the features and talk about them in depth. So you don't want to miss it. Make sure to follow me on Instagram at Mandy Fine Artist and join our mailing list at the School of Atelier Arts. I send out all of our best stuff through the mailing list. If you're here today because of the mailing list, that's why. So definitely make sure to join there. Always love being here with you on Monday mornings. Happy holidays, everybody, and we will see you soon. Toodles.